He's just a librarian who thinks in pennies, my ex-wife said. 20 years later, they wanted my millions. But I brought something else to Thanksgiving dinner. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. The phone rang with a shrillness that felt foreign in the quiet of my small Walton, Pennsylvania home. For 20 years, the only calls I received were from the library or the occasional wrong number. I let it ring 3 times, my hand hovering over the receiver before answering. Dad, the voice was thicker, layered with an artificial confidence I didn't recognize, but it was him. Elliot, my knuckles tightened around the phone. 20 Thanksgivings had passed in this house, each one marked by the silence he had imposed. Elliot, I said, my voice as steady as the old oak desk beneath my hands. This is a surprise. Yeah, well, it's been too long. I could almost hear the practiced smile in his voice. Listen, Mom and I were talking, and with Thanksgiving just a week away, we'd love for you to come. You know, for a real family dinner. Family, the word was a bitter pill. I stared at the bookshelf across the room, at the worn spines of history books that had been my only companions. My mind flashed back to that cold November day, to Beatrice, my ex-wife, standing in the doorway with a look of pure contempt. He's a librarian, Elliot, she'd said, not to me, but to our son. He thinks in pennies while the world deals in dollars. There's no future here. Elliot, just 25 and already worshipping at her altar of ambition, had nodded. He couldn't even look at me when he said it. She's right, Dad. We're leaving. You're just not what we need. They had needed my income then, but they had craved a fortune I couldn't provide. I wasn't kicked out with a shout, but with a quiet, soul-crushing dismissal. A failure. Now, after a forgotten tech stock I'd bought in the 90s had matured into a small fortune, they needed me again. The news had been quiet, just a small mention in a financial journal, but I knew they watched those things. I see, I said into the phone, pulling my thoughts back to the present. A family dinner, how thoughtful. It'll be great, he pushed on, oblivious. Just like old times. A cold resolve settled over me, a feeling I had been nurturing for months, ever since the stock matured. This wasn't just a phone call. It was an opening, an opportunity. My voice came out smooth, betraying none of the storm inside me. You're right, son. It's time. I'll be there. He heard the feigned warmth in my voice and relaxed his relief, palpable, even through the phone line. He had no idea the call was simply the first move in a game I had been planning for years. He thought he was setting a trap for my money. He didn't realize he had just walked into mine. The cursor blinked expectantly. I typed the name of the woman who had shared my life for 25 years and shattered it in a single afternoon. Beatrice. Her digital ghost was different from Elliot's. Where his was a facade of professional success, hers was one of socialite grace. Her social media was a curated gallery of a life I knew she could not afford. There she was, smiling at a charity gala, her name listed on the event's bronze-level sponsor list. There she was again, clinking champagne glasses at an art gallery opening, tagged in a photo by the gallery owner himself. Each post was a performance. She wrote captions about the importance of giving back and supporting the local arts, all while wearing designer clothes that must have cost more than my monthly mortgage. It was the same ambition I remembered, just polished for a new audience. The ambition that had deemed my steady librarian salary a mark of failure. But, like any good researcher, I knew the real story wasn't on the surface. It was in the public records, the documents that don't lie. I navigated to the Pennsylvania County Court portal, a database I knew well from my library work helping people with genealogical research. I entered her name. The screen populated with a list of civil filings. My breath caught, not in surprise, but in grim affirmation. There were 3 lawsuits from major credit card companies, all filed within the last 18 months. Each one was for an unpaid balance exceeding $20,000. There was a lien against her car for a defaulted loan. Most telling of all, there was an eviction notice from 2 years ago filed by the landlord of a high-end apartment she had clearly been unable to maintain. She wasn't a wealthy philanthropist. She was a woman drowning in debt, desperately treading water in a sea of her own lies. The designer dresses, the charity donations, the champagne, it was all smoke. It was all funded by credit, and I suspected by the savings of the very people Elliot was scamming. They were a team. He was the engine preying on the hopeful to generate cash. She was the showroom creating the illusion of inherited wealth and success that gave his schemes a veneer of legitimacy. She didn't need to work. She just needed to perform. I saved each document to the ledger. The file was growing, becoming a detailed map of their desperation. The lawsuits, the debts, the eviction, it all painted a clear picture. The Thanksgiving invitation wasn't just an opportunistic grasp for my new fortune. It was a lifeline. They weren't just greedy, they were cornered. And a cornered animal is the most dangerous. But I wasn't afraid. I felt a cold clarity. I now understood the full scope of their deception. I knew exactly where to press to make the whole rotten structure collapse. As if summoned by my very thoughts, the phone began to ring again. I didn't need to look at the caller ID. I knew. I let it ring twice before picking up, composing my voice into a mask of placid neutrality. Howard. The voice was honeyed, but brittle underneath, like a thin layer of sugar over glass. It's Beatrice. I hope I'm not disturbing you. Beatrice, I said, keeping my tone even. To what do I owe the pleasure? Oh, Howard, always so formal. She laughed a sound that never quite reached her eyes, even over the phone. I was just thinking about you, about us, about family. Elliot told me he called, and I'm just so thrilled you're coming for Thanksgiving. It seemed like the right thing to do, I replied, non-committal. I could hear the faint clinking of ice in a glass on her end. It is, she affirmed quickly. Family is the most important thing, you know, especially when times are challenging. There it was, the opening move. I remained silent, forcing her to continue. In the quiet space between us, I pictured the stack of unpaid credit card bills on her phantom desk. You know, she went on, her voice dropping into a more conspiratorial tone, Elliot would never tell you this himself. He's far too proud. But he's been working so hard, building his business from the ground up. I thought of the retired mechanic from Ohio. I'm sure he has, I said. But the world is so unpredictable now, she sighed dramatically. He's facing some headwinds. Nothing serious, of course, just a temporary cash flow issue. You know how business is. I see. Her voice brightened, sensing an opening that wasn't there. I knew you'd understand. You were always so sensible with money. A bit too cautious, perhaps, but sensible. The backhanded compliment was a classic Beatrice maneuver. And now that things are better for you, I just thought, well, it's a wonderful opportunity for you to be a father again, to guide him, to help. The word hung in the air between us. Help. She hadn't said money. She didn't need to. After 20 years of treating me like a ghost, she was now invoking my fatherhood as a means to an end. It was more brazen than I had expected. Help him how, Beatrice? I asked, my voice deliberately calm. She paused, likely choosing her next words with the care of a chess player. Well, just to be there for him, to offer your support, to show him that his father is in his corner, especially now that he has the resources to make a real difference. She had just laid her first card on the table. It was a weak one, cloaked in sentimentality, but it was a start. My plan was working perfectly. They were walking right into it. I let her words hang in the silence. It was a technique I'd learned in the quiet halls of the library. People are uncomfortable with dead air. They rush to fill it, often revealing more than they intend. Beatrice was no exception. She stammered, the honeyed tone fraying slightly at the edges. A father wants to see his son succeed, doesn't he? To remove obstacles from his path. Sometimes, I said slowly, choosing each word with precision. And sometimes a father's role is to ensure his son learns how to navigate those obstacles himself. What kind of lesson would he learn if his problems were simply paid away, Beatrice? The question caught her off guard. There was a sharp intake of breath on her end. This isn't a DAS lesson. Howard, this is his DAS future. It's not a bailout, it's an investment. An investment in your own family. An investment requires due diligence, I countered, my voice still infuriatingly calm. It requires an understanding of the business, its assets, its liabilities. I thought of the testimonies in my digital ledger. Tell me, what exactly is the nature of Elliot's business? It's financial strategies, she said, sounding flustered. It's very modern, all online. A bit too complex for me, to be honest. But he's brilliant at it. Absolutely brilliant. She didn't know. She likely didn't care to know the details, only that it was meant to produce the wealth she felt entitled to. Her ignorance was another piece of the puzzle. She was a willing accomplice, but not a strategic partner. I see, I said. It was all I needed to say. Her frustration was palpable, now a crackling energy coming through the receiver. Howard, I don't understand you. After all these years, after everything, we're trying to reach out to mend fences, and you're talking like a banker. Perhaps that's what Elliot needs right now, I said. Not a father he's ignored for 20 years, but a banker. I could hear her patience snapping. Fine, be that way. Just think about it. Think about what's really important. We'll see you on Thursday. I'll be there, I said. And I will certainly think about what you've said. Before she could respond, I gently placed the receiver back in its cradle, cutting off the connection. The click was one of the most satisfying sounds I had ever heard. I stood there for a long moment, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across my desk. Beatrice thought she had planted a seed of familial duty. She thought I was considering her proposal, weighing the investment. She was wrong. I wasn't considering her proposal at all. I was finalizing the details of my test. The next morning I sat at my desk, the gray light of a Pennsylvania dawn filtering through the window. It was time. I took a deep breath, marshalling the actor I never knew I had inside me, and dialed Elliot's number. He answered on the second ring, his voice professionally cheerful. "Dad, good to hear from you. Thinking about Thanksgiving." I let a tremor enter my voice, a carefully crafted quaver of distress. "Elliot, son, something terrible has happened." The cheerfulness in his voice vanished, replaced by a cautious curiosity. "What? What's wrong? Are you okay?" "It's the money, Elliot," I said, letting out a heavy rehearsed sigh. "The stock, the one that changed things." I paused, as if gathering the strength to speak. There was a market correction, a tech bubble. It's mostly gone. Silence. For a full 5 seconds, the only sound was the hum of the connection. It was a silence so profound, so telling, that it confirmed everything. He wasn't calculating how to help his father. He was calculating his own losses. "Gone," he finally managed to say. The word was flat, lifeless. "What do you mean gone? How much is gone?" "Almost all of it," I lied, injecting a note of shame. "I made some bad moves, got some bad advice, tried to chase the market. I was foolish, Elliot. I have enough to live on, of course, but the windfall, it's gone." "Oh," was all he said. Not "I'm sorry, Dad." Not "don't worry, we'll figure it out." Just "oh." I waited, letting him squirm on the hook I'd set. "Well," he said, finally clearing his throat. His voice was different now. Colder, distant. "Dad, that's just terrible news. Really unfortunate." "It is," I agreed, my own voice a picture of defeat. "I don't know what I'm going to do." "Yeah. Look," he said, the words coming faster now about Thanksgiving. "You know things are a little crazy here. Beatrice and we've got a lot on our plate. And the house is smaller than it looks. It might be a bit stressful for you with everything you're going through." There it was, the guillotine falling swift and clean. "Are you uninviting me, Elliot?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. No, of course not," he said, the denial too quick, too loud. "It's just, maybe it's for the best if we postpone, until you're back on your feet. Less pressure on everyone." "I understand," I said, and the cold truth of it was that I finally did. I understood completely. I wouldn't want to be a burden. "Exactly, I knew you'd get it. Look, Dad, I have to run big meeting. We'll talk soon." He hung up before I could reply. I placed the receiver back down my hand, perfectly steady. The test was over. The results were conclusive. I was not his father. I was a walking bank account, and now that the account was supposedly empty, I was no longer of any use. The silence that followed Elliot's betrayal was not empty. It was filled with a cold, hard resolve. The emotional part of my plan was over. Now the logistical part began. I was no longer a father scorned. I was a librarian of consequences, and it was time to put my research to use. I opened the file on my computer named The Ledger. For a moment I simply looked at the collected evidence, the fraudulent website, the social media lies, the court documents detailing Beatrice's debts, the heartbreaking stories from Elliot's victims. It was a tapestry of deceit, woven over many years. It was time to pull the first thread. I picked up the phone again. This time I dialed a local number one I knew from memory. It belonged to Mark Jensen, an investigative reporter for the Walton Valley Chronicle. Mark was an old-school journalist who still believed in facts. He'd spent many afternoons in my library digging through archives for his stories. He trusted me as a source of information. He didn't know he was about to get the story of his career. "Jensen," he answered, his voice gruff. "Mark," I said, keeping my voice low and anonymous, "I have a tip for you. I can't give you my name. You can call me a concerned citizen." There was a skeptical pause. "I get a dozen of those a day. What's this about?" "It's about a local financial advisor named Elliot Pierce," I said, "and the trail of broken lives he's leaving behind." I could hear him typing. "Pierce Financial Strategies. Seen his ads. Looks slick. What's the angle?" "The angle is that it's a complete fraud," I said plainly. "He's selling worthless courses to retirees and desperate people. He operates out of a P.O. box, and he's preying on your readers." "Those are big claims," Mark said, his reporter's caution kicking in. "You have proof?" "I have a name for you," I said. "George Findlay, a retired mechanic from Ohio. Look him up. He lost his life savings to Elliot. His story is on a consumer watchdog forum. It will verify everything I'm saying. This was the hook. A verifiable fact. A human victim. I heard the rhythm of his typing change, becoming faster, more focused. George Findlay, he repeated. Okay. Why are you telling me this? Because people like Elliot Pierce thrive in the dark, I said. They count on their victims being too ashamed or too powerless to speak up. They need to be brought into the light. There was another pause, but this one was different. It was the sound of a journalist sensing a real story. All right, Mr. Concerned Citizen, he said. You've got my attention. I'll start digging. That's all I ask, I replied. I hung up the phone. I hadn't destroyed anything yet. I had simply placed a small, hard stone of truth where I knew it would start an avalanche. The media was the first front. The next would be more personal. Mark Jensen was a good reporter, but I knew he would hit a wall. Victims of these scams were often too embarrassed to speak to the press. They felt foolish, and their shame became a shield for predators like Elliot. I couldn't let that happen. If I wanted the avalanche to begin, I had to provide the first rolling stone myself. The next afternoon, after hours of careful searching through public databases, I found a phone number for George Findlay in Ohio. I sat with the number for a long time, considering my approach. I couldn't be an anonymous source here. I needed to be a peer, someone who understood. I dialed. An older man's voice, weary and cautious, answered the phone. Hello, is this Mr. George Findlay? I asked, my voice calm and respectful. Who's asking? He replied, the suspicion evident. My name is Howard. You don't know me, but I believe we have something in common. I'm calling about a man named Elliot Pierce. The silence on the other end was heavy. I could hear the sound of a television in the background. I've got nothing to say about him, George said finally, his voice hardening. I understand, I said gently. I read your story on the consumer forum. What he did to you was wrong, Mr. Findlay. It wasn't your fault. The words seemed to disarm him slightly. The hardness in his voice softened, replaced by a deep-seated sadness. It felt like my fault. I should have known better. A lifetime of working with my hands, and I get taken by some slick talker on a computer screen. These men are professionals, I assured him. They know exactly what to say. They prey on good people who have worked hard their whole lives. My own family has been affected by a similar scheme. That's how I learned about Mr. Pierce. It was a partial truth, but it created a bridge between us. He let out a long sigh. It's the shame of it, you know, telling my wife. We lost nearly everything we'd saved for the grandkids. And that shame is what he's counting on, I said, pressing the point gently. He believes you will stay silent. He believes all his victims will. It's how he continues to operate. What's it to you, George? Asked, a flicker of the old suspicion returning. I am putting together a case against him, I said. A real one. I have documents, evidence. But what I need most are the human stories, the truth. A reporter from the Walton Valley Chronicle may be calling you. His name is Mark Jensen. He's a good man. If you're willing, just telling him what you told me could help make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. I heard him take a shaky breath. I don't know. You don't have to decide now, I said. Just think about it. Elliot Pierce believes you are invisible. I believe you are the key. I gave him my number, thanked him for his time, and hung up. I had planted another seed. This one I knew would take time to grow. But for the first time, George Findlay had a voice of support. And for the first time, my son's carefully constructed world of lies had a crack in its foundation. The next 2 days passed in a profound silence. I had cast the stones into the water, and now I could only wait for the ripples to reach the shore. I went about my routines. I tidied the bookshelves, paid my bills, and drank my coffee while watching the November leaves skitter across the quiet street. But underneath the placid surface of my life, a silent, powerful engine was turning. Every time the phone rang, my heart would give a slight, disciplined lurch. The first time it was a local charity asking for a donation. The second, a wrong number. Neither Elliot nor Beatrice called again. My supposed poverty had made me a ghost to them once more, which was exactly what I wanted. Their silence was a gift, giving me the space I needed to work. I sat at my desk, the ledger open on my computer screen. It was more than just a collection of evidence now. It was a testament to a life of quiet desperation, theirs not mine. I felt no rage as I reviewed the details, no burning desire for vengeance. That was an emotion for younger, more reckless men. What I felt was a surgeon's cold precision. A cancer had grown on my family name, and I was preparing to remove it. I thought of the boy Elliot had been the one who loved history books and asked endless questions about the Civil War. Where had that boy gone? When did the curiosity in his eyes curdle into calculation? I knew the answer. It happened under Beatrice's tutelage in a home where a man's worth was measured not by his character but by his tax bracket. They had kicked me out not because I was a bad father, but because I was a bad investment. Now I was simply applying the same cold logic to them. On the afternoon of the second day, I was rereading a biography of General Grant when the phone finally rang with a number I didn't recognize. It had a Harrisburg area code. My pulse quickened, but my hand was steady as I reached for the receiver. This was it. One way or another, a ripple had finally reached me. I answered on the second ring, my voice a level, neutral query. "Hello. I'm looking for the concerned citizen who called me 2 days ago," the gruff voice of Mark Jensen said. "I think I've found him." A wave of cold satisfaction washed over me. "You've been busy, Mark." "You have no idea," he said, and I could hear the rustle of papers. "Your tip was solid. I spoke with George Findley in Ohio. He was hesitant at first, but then he opened up. The story he told. It's heartbreaking. The man lost everything." "George is not the only one," I stated, keeping my tone factual. "You can say that again," Mark grunted. Following the breadcrumbs from Findley's story, I found 2 more victims in western Pennsylvania. Same M.O. A woman who lost her pension and a young couple who drained their savings for a down payment on a house. "Pierce is a snake. He thrives on the silence of his victims." I repeated the words I had used before. "Not for much longer," Jensen replied, a new energy in his voice. "This is bigger than just a consumer alert piece. This is front-page stuff. Fraud. Exploitation. But I need more than just anonymous forum posts. I need someone to go on the record. George will talk," I said, with a confidence I didn't entirely feel. "I believe you'll find he's had a change of heart." There was a thoughtful pause. "You spoke to him, didn't you?" "I merely encouraged him to find his voice," I said, sidestepping the question. "Right," Mark said, a note of respect in his voice. "Well, I appreciate the encouragement. I'm meeting with Findley tomorrow. This story is moving fast. We're aiming to run it the day before Thanksgiving." The timing was perfect. A story about a man who scams families published on the biggest family holiday of the year. It was poetic. "One more thing," Mark said before he hung up. "I don't know who you are or what your stake is in all this, but you're doing a public service. When this is all over, I owe you one." "Just print the truth, Mark," I said. "That's all the payment I need." I ended the call and stood by the window watching the weak afternoon light fade. It was done. The mechanism was in motion, and it was now bigger than just my private plan. I had given the story to the world, and the world would now sit in judgment. Elliot and Beatrice were busy preparing for a Thanksgiving feast, meant to ensnare a millionaire. They had no idea that a different kind of reckoning was being prepared for them, one that would be served to the entire town on their morning paper. With the reporter's story now a ticking clock, I had one final move to make. I had to reverse the board to reset the trap. The test had served its purpose. Now I needed to undo it to ensure my son would be eagerly waiting for me on Thanksgiving Day. I picked up the phone and dialed his number, my heart beating with the slow, steady rhythm of a predator closing in. Dad Elliot's voice was flat, annoyed, as if I were a telemarketer. "Elliot, son, you're not going to believe this," I said, injecting a breathless, almost foolish excitement into my voice. "It's a miracle." "What are you talking about?" he asked, his tone wary. "The money, the stock," I exclaimed. "It was all a misunderstanding, a temporary dip, a paper loss. It bounced back, Elliot. It bounced back higher than ever. I'm sorry for worrying you." I panicked like an old fool. The silence that followed was electric. I could almost hear the gears grinding in his head, the rapid recalculation, the dawning realization that he had just fumbled a fortune. "Really," he finally choked out. "Dad, are you serious? The money is back." "More than back," I said, barely containing a smile. "This whole scare has made me realize something. I'm getting older. I need to think about the future, about family. I've been talking to my lawyer about setting up a family trust." "A trust," he repeated the word, full of reverence. "That's right," I said, letting the bait dangle. "A significant one. For you, for Beatrice, for any future grandchildren. A legacy. I thought we could discuss the details at Thanksgiving. If the invitation is still open, that is." His response was a torrent of false warmth. "Open, Dad, of course. It's open. We were just worried about you. The stress, you know. We would be absolutely honored to have you. Mom will be thrilled. A family trust. Dad, that's incredible news. I'm so relieved for you." The speed of his reversal was almost comical. 24 hours ago, I was a burden. Now I was the guest of honor. "Wonderful," I said, my voice dripping with manufactured sincerity. "I'll see you Thursday at 6. I'll bring the necessary paperwork to get the ball rolling. We'll be counting the minutes, Dad, he said, his voice practically singing. I hung up the phone and looked out the window. The trap was set. The bait had been taken. He wasn't just expecting a guest for dinner. He was expecting a golden goose ready to lay an egg right on his dining room table. He had no idea the only thing I would be serving was justice. The night before Thanksgiving was colder than usual. A thin, crystalline frost coated the window panes of my study, distorting the familiar lights of Walton into a distant, blurry constellation. The house was silent, but my mind was not. It was sharp, clear, and focused on the task ahead. Tomorrow I would walk into my son's home as a guest. I would sit at his table, break bread with him and his mother, and perform my final role in the fiction they had created. But tonight I was not an actor. I was a librarian preparing his final exhibit. On my desk, I laid out the contents of the ledger. Not the digital file, but the physical manifestation of it. I had spent the afternoon at the local print shop, turning the cold, hard data into something tangible. First, the printouts of the complaints from the Consumer Watchdog Forum. I arranged the stories of George, Maria, and the others into a neat stack. Their words, filled with pain and betrayal, felt heavy in my hands. Next, the public records. The credit card lawsuits against Beatrice, the eviction notice, the car loan defaults. I highlighted the dates and the amounts in a stark red ink. Each red line was a testament to a life lived on borrowed time and borrowed money. Then came the screenshots. Elliot posing next to a gleaming sports car he didn't own. Beatrice at a gala she couldn't afford. The glossy artifice of their lives captured in pixels. Finally, I printed a single clean copy of my own bank statement. Not the whole thing, just the current balance. It was a number so large it looked like a misprint. I placed this at the very bottom of the pile. I took out an old leather-bound ledger I'd bought at a flea market years ago. It was the kind accountants used to use with crisp-lined pages. I carefully placed all the documents inside, turning the book into a portfolio of their ruin. This was the paperwork I had promised to bring. This was the foundation of their new family trust. A trust built not on money but on truth. I closed the heavy cover. The sound echoed in the quiet room. There was no joy in this moment, no thrill of victory, just a profound, sorrowful sense of necessity. This was not the legacy I had ever wanted to leave for my son, but it was the one he had earned. I would sleep well tonight. It would be the calm, dreamless sleep of a man who knows with absolute certainty what he must do next. Thanksgiving Day arrived gray and cold. I drove across town, the old leather ledger resting on the passenger seat beside me like a silent co-pilot. Elliot's house was in a new soulless development on the edge of Walton, a neighborhood of identical houses with perfectly manicured lawns. It was a place that screamed new money, even if the money itself was an illusion. I parked my modest sedan behind a gleaming black SUV that I knew was leased. As I walked to the door, ledger in hand, I could already feel the performance beginning. Elliot opened the door before I could ring the bell, a wide predatory smile plastered on his face. "Dad, you made it. Welcome home." He wrapped his arms around me in a hug that felt both hollow and constricting. Over his shoulder, I saw Beatrice gliding towards us, her face a mask of practiced warmth. "Howard, darling," she cooed, taking my coat. "It's been too long. You look wonderful. Prosperity suits you." "Beatrice." "Elliot," I nodded, stepping into the foyer. The house smelled of roasted turkey and air freshener. It was impeccably clean, but it felt like a showroom, not a home. The furniture was oversized and ostentatious. The art on the walls was generic and chosen to impress, not to inspire. It was a stage, and I was the audience they were desperate to win over. "Let me take that for you," Elliot said, reaching for the ledger. I held it a little tighter. "No, thank you, son. This is important. It's the paperwork I mentioned." His eyes lit up with a greedy fire that he quickly tried to conceal. Of course, of course. Well, make yourself at home. Can I get you a drink?" As he and Beatrice bustled around me, their movements overly solicitous, I took in the scene. They were playing their parts perfectly, the devoted son, the welcoming ex-wife. They poured me a glass of expensive wine I knew they couldn't afford, and chattered about meaningless things, the weather, the traffic, the terrible local football team. They were laying the groundwork, building a foundation of false bonhomie before they made their move for my money. They thought they were in complete control, that the old librarian was a simple man, easily dazzled by their performance. They had no idea that I was not the audience. I was the director, and the final act was about to begin. We sat at a dining table large enough for 12. The turkey was golden brown, the side dishes plentiful. It was a perfect picture from a magazine, almost too perfect to be real. "It is so wonderful to have you here," Howard. Beatrice began raising her wine glass. "To family. To new beginnings. To new beginnings, I echoed, taking a small sip. The wine was sharp and acidic, a cheap vintage in an expensive bottle. Elliot carved the turkey with a flourish, placing a large slice on my plate. So, Dad, what do you think of the place? We've been working hard to build a life we can be proud of. It's very spacious, I said, the most neutral word I could find. It's a start, he said with false modesty. The business is really taking off. We're looking at expanding next year, going national. The potential is through the roof. I thought of George Findlay, whose roof was likely in desperate need of repair after investing with my son. Is that so? I asked, cutting a piece of turkey. What is the key to your success? Vision, Elliot said instantly, the word polished from overuse. You have to see the opportunities others miss. It's not about working hard anymore, Dad. It's about working smart. We're helping people achieve financial freedom. Beatrice chimed in, placing her hand on Elliot's arm. He's being modest. He's a true visionary, Howard. He has this incredible ability to connect with people to help them see their own potential. To see their bank accounts, I thought. I looked at both of them, their faces glowing with earnest deception in the candlelight. They were so committed to the performance, so certain of my gullibility. And now that your own finances are secure, Elliot continued steering the conversation, exactly where he intended it. Really changes the landscape, doesn't it? It opens up possibilities. For the whole family, it certainly provides a new perspective, I agreed carefully. Exactly, he said, leaning forward, his eyes gleaming with the same fire I'd seen when I mentioned the ledger. With the right foundation, a real capital base, a family like ours could build a dynasty. Something that lasts. That's what your idea about a family trust was, Dad. It was brilliant. A real legacy. They fell silent, watching me, waiting for me to take the bait. The air was thick with expectation. I picked up my fork, deliberately taking another bite of stuffing. I chewed slowly, thoughtfully. This is excellent stuffing, Beatrice, I said, finally, looking directly at her. Did you make it from scratch? The question hung in the air, so mundane, so completely divergent from the path they were on, that it momentarily shattered their entire performance. I saw a flicker of frustration in Elliot's eyes before he masked it with a smile. The game was getting more interesting. Beatrice cleared the dinner plates with a brittle smile, her movements tight with unspoken frustration. When she disappeared into the kitchen, Elliot leaned forward, dropping the last pretense of casual conversation. The mask was beginning to slip. Dad, he said, his voice low and urgent, that was a great dinner, really. But we should talk about the reason you're here. The trust. Business before dessert, I asked, raising an eyebrow. I thought we were here for a family reunion. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. This is family business, the most important kind. You said you brought the paperwork. I'd like to see what your lawyer has drawn up. His greed was so naked, so raw, it was almost pitiful. He saw the leather-bound ledger sitting on the small table by my chair, and his eyes fixed on it like a starving wolf spotting its prey. Beatrice returned, carrying a pumpkin pie. She placed it on the table and sat down, her posture perfectly aligned with her son's W. They were a united front. Elliot's right, Howard, she said smoothly. There's no time like the present to plan for the future. We're all just so excited about your vision. To build something together after all this time. My vision, I repeated slowly. I looked from my son's eager face to my ex-wife's calculated smile. And what do you imagine that vision is? To secure the Pierce name, Elliot said, his voice filled with a grandeur he had no right to. To create generational wealth. With your capital and my strategic direction, we could be one of the most influential families in Pennsylvania in a decade. He truly believed it. He had convinced himself that his scams were strategic direction, and my money was the missing ingredient. He wasn't just a con man. He was the first person he conned. I see, I said. So you want to see the paperwork. We're ready when you are, Beatrice purred. I looked at the pie she had just served. A perfect slice sat on my plate waiting. All right, I said, my voice calm. I reached down and lifted the heavy ledger, placing it in the center of the table with a soft, definitive thud. The sound seemed to silence the room. But first, I said, picking up my fork, let's have some dessert. I have a feeling we're going to need our strength for the conversation to come. Their eyes were glued to the book. They could almost taste the money inside it. They didn't see the trap. They only saw the prize. And in their greed, they were completely, utterly blind. I finished the last bite of pie, the sweetness tasting like ashes in my mouth. I placed my fork down gently beside the plate. The sound was unnaturally loud in the silent room. Elliot and Beatrice were leaning forward, their bodies tense, their eyes fixed on the leather-bound book. Their manufactured smiles had faded, replaced by raw, undisguised anticipation. "Well," Elliot said, his voice tight. "Dessert's finished. Shall we?" "By all means," I replied. I placed my hands on the cover of the ledger. "You wanted to discuss the foundation of the Pierce family legacy. So let's begin." I opened the book. The first page wasn't a legal document detailing a trust. It was a printout from a website. A man's face, weathered and kind, looked up from the page. "Who the hell is that?" Elliot snapped, his patience gone. "His name is George Findlay," I said, my voice cold and clear. "A retired mechanic from Ohio. He was your first entry into this ledger. He invested $5,000, his life savings, into your Inner Circle mentorship program." I flipped the page. "And this is Maria Sanchez, a widow. Her pension is gone, thanks to your vision." I continued to turn the pages, each one revealing a new face, a new story. A young couple, an elderly man, the victims of his greed. Their names filled the air like a final judgment. Elliot's face had gone pale, a stark white against the dark wood of the dining room. "What is this? What have you done?" "I've done my due diligence," I said, my voice cutting through his panic. "Something you have clearly never done. This, Elliot, is your business. Not the fantasy you sell, but the reality. This is your ledger." "This is insane," Beatrice whispered, her hand flying to her throat. "Howard, this is a joke. A sick joke." "Is it?" I flipped to a new section. "Let's discuss your contributions to the family legacy, Beatrice." The next page was a court filing, a lawsuit from a credit card company. I turned the page again. Another lawsuit, then another, then the eviction notice. "You speak of building a dynasty," I said, my eyes locking with hers, "but you can't even pay your bills. The dress you are wearing, the wine you served, this very house, it's all a lie, bought with other people's misery." Beatrice stared at the papers, speechless. The mask of the elegant socialite had shattered, revealing the desperate, frightened woman beneath. Elliot stood up so abruptly his chair screeched against the floor. "You," he seethed, pointing a shaking finger at me, "you have no right." "I have every right," I said, my voice rising for the first time, filled with the weight of 20 years of silence. "I have the right of a father whose name you have disgraced. And I have the right of a man who is about to watch your entire world burn to the ground." As if on cue, a phone buzzed on the table. Then another. Elliot stared at his buzzing phone as if it were a venomous snake. An alert had flashed across the screen. Then another. Beatrice fumbled for her own phone, her hands trembling. "What is it?" she breathed, her eyes wide with terror. Elliot's thumb shook as he tapped the screen. His face, already pale, seemed to collapse. It's an article," he stammered. "The Chronicle, the local paper." He read the headline aloud, his voice cracking. "Local financial guru, accused of defrauding retirees. It's about me. It's got names. It has George Findlay's picture." "No," Beatrice gasped. She scrolled through her own phone. "My God. The comments. People are sharing it everywhere. They're calling us thieves. Monsters." The phones didn't stop. A relentless barrage of notifications, each one a digital stone cast in their direction. Messages from friends they thought they had. Alerts from social media platforms they had so carefully curated. Their world of lies was being dismantled in real time right in front of my eyes. "How?" Elliot whispered, looking at me, his eyes finally registering the full scope of what was happening. The pieces were clicking into place in his mind. The reporter, the victims. It was you. All of it. You did this to us. "I did nothing," I said, my voice as calm as the eye of the storm. "I simply provided the light. The truth did the rest." "You ruined us," Beatrice shrieked, her voice raw with panic. "We're your family. How could you?" "When was I family to you, Beatrice?" I asked quietly. "Was it when you told our son his father was a failure? Was it during the 20 years of silence? Or was it only when you thought my bank account was large enough to be of use to you?" She had no answer. She just stared at me, her mouth opening and closing silently. Elliot was frantically tapping at his phone, a desperate attempt to control an inferno with a water pistol. "I can fix this," he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. "A statement. I'll issue a statement. Deny everything." But it was too late. The avalanche had started. The first stone I had placed had dislodged others, and now the entire mountain of their deceit was crashing down around them. The reporter's story was just the beginning. The lawsuits would follow, the criminal investigations, the public humiliation. I stood up from the table. My work here was done. The performance was over. "You can't just leave," Elliot yelled, his voice cracking with a mixture of rage and desperation. I paused at the door of the dining room and looked back at them. Two people trapped in the wreckage of their own greed, illuminated by the cold, unforgiving glow of their phone screens. "I'm not leaving," I said. "I left 20 years ago. You just never noticed." I walked away from the dining room without looking back. The sounds behind me were a chaotic symphony of ruin, Beatrice's choked sobs, Elliot's frantic muttered curses, the incessant mocking buzz of their phones. I did not feel triumph. I did not feel anger. I felt only a vast, quiet emptiness. The final page of a long, sad chapter had been turned. I retrieved my coat from the rack in the foyer. My hands were perfectly steady as I buttoned it. I had imagined this moment for months, played it out in my mind 1,000 times. I had expected to feel a surge of satisfaction, a sense of righteous victory. But the reality was much quieter. It felt like closing a book after finishing the last sentence. The story was over. There was nothing left to feel but the silence that followed. "Dad, wait!" Elliot's voice came from behind me, stripped of all its arrogance, replaced by the raw, primal fear of a cornered animal. I paused with my hand on the doorknob, but did not turn. "Please," he begged. "You can't do this. There has to be a way to fix this. The money, the trust. We can still—" "There is no trust, Elliot," I said, my voice flat, speaking to the closed door in front of me. "There is no money for you. There is only the ledger, the one you wrote with your own actions." "Howard, please," Beatrice's voice joined his thin and reedy. "He's your son." I finally turned just enough to see their faces in the dim light of the hallway. They were pale, shattered figures, their expensive clothes looking like costumes on a stage that had just collapsed. "He stopped being my son the day he decided my worth was measured by my bank account," I said. "You both taught him that lesson. Well, this is simply the final exam." I opened the front door. The cold November air felt clean pure. It washed over me, cleansing the stale atmosphere of their house from my lungs. I stepped outside onto the porch and pulled the door shut behind me. The click of the latch was the sound of a lock turning on a prison I hadn't realized I was in for 20 years. I walked down the perfect stone pathway to my car. I did not run. I did not hurry. From inside the house I heard a sound of pure despair, a wail that was cut off as the heavy door muffled it. I got into my car, started the engine, and pulled away from the curb. In my rearview mirror, the house, with its perfectly manicured lawn and hollow interior, grew smaller and smaller, until it was just another light among many in the quiet Thanksgiving night. Then it was gone. I didn't drive far that Thanksgiving night. I pulled into a quiet diner on the highway, ordered a cup of black coffee, and sat by the window watching the trucks roll by. The weight of 20 years had lifted from my shoulders. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel sad. I felt balanced. The ledger was balanced. In the weeks that followed, I kept my distance. I didn't need to be close to see the fallout. The story had a life of its own now. Mark Jensen's article in the Chronicle was just the beginning. The story was picked up by larger papers in Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. The Thanksgiving takedown, one headline called it. Mark's phone had apparently rung off the hook with calls from other victims, emboldened by George Findley's courage. The two victims Mark had found in Pennsylvania came forward, and their stories were even more devastating than George's. The public outcry in Walton was swift and brutal. In a small town built on hard work and trust, a predator like Elliot was a pariah. I heard from a neighbor at the grocery store that he and Beatrice hadn't left their house in days. For sale signs from the rental company appeared on their manicured lawn less than a week later. Then came the legal consequences. The local district attorney, likely spurred by the public pressure, launched a formal investigation into Pierce financial strategies. The lawsuits from the victims, which had been individual and scattered, were consolidated into a class action case. Elliot's assets were frozen. The leased SUV was repossessed. The house of cards had been blown over by a breath of truth. Beatrice faced her own kind of reckoning. The social circles she had worked so desperately to infiltrate slammed their doors in her face. The charity boards quietly removed her name from their letterheads. Her creditors, seeing the public implosion, called in their debts with a new ferocity. She had built a life based on the appearance of wealth, and when that appearance vanished, there was nothing left. I read about it all in the papers, an observer from afar. Mark called me once, his voice filled with a grim professional satisfaction. "The DA thinks they have a rock-solid case for fraud," he told me. "They're facing serious time. You started a fire, Howard." "No," Mark one corrected him gently. "I just struck a match. The fire was already there, waiting to happen." Winter in Walton was long and gray, but as the first signs of spring began to appear, the crocuses pushing through the last of the snow, the return of birdsong in the morning, I felt a thawing inside myself. The cold, hard purpose that had driven me for months had been fulfilled. The ledger was closed. The question now was what to write in the new one. The money sat in my bank account, a silent testament to a lucky investment made decades ago. For a time it had been a tool, a weapon to bring about a necessary justice. But I had no desire to live the life of a rich man. The oversized houses and leased luxury cars of Elliot's world held no appeal for me. They were just traps, gilded cages of anxiety and debt. My small house, filled with books and quiet comfort, was all I had ever needed. So, what was the money for? I thought of the people in the ledger, George Maria, the young couple. They were not financially savvy. They had been taught to work hard, save their money, and trust in others. Their trust had been betrayed. They lacked the one thing that could have protected them: knowledge. That's when the idea began to form. It started as a whisper and grew into a clear, solid purpose. Eliot had spoken of creating a legacy, a dynasty built on lies. I would build a real one. I spent the next few weeks not with a stockbroker, but with a lawyer who specialized in nonprofit foundations. I explained my vision. I wanted to create a fund, an endowment for the town of Walton and the surrounding valley. It wouldn't be for charity galas or art exhibits. It would be for something far more fundamental: the Pierce Educational Trust. Its mission would be simple: to provide free financial literacy education to anyone who needed it. Workshops for seniors on how to spot scams. Classes for young people on budgeting and responsible investing. Counseling for families struggling with debt. I would use my fortune not to build an empire, but to build a shield. A shield of knowledge to protect the good, hard-working people of my town from the Elliots of the world. I would be a librarian once more, but this time the library I was building was one of practical wisdom and self-reliance. My lawyer was a good man. He looked at me across his desk after I'd laid out the entire plan. "This is a wonderful thing, Howard," he said. "A true inheritance for your community." I smiled. For the first time in a long time, it was a smile of genuine peace. Elliot and Beatrice had taught me a valuable lesson. A legacy is not what you own. It's what you build for others. A year has passed. I no longer spend my afternoons in the silence of my own home, but in the welcoming bustle of the Walton Community Center. Every Tuesday I stand in front of a small classroom of people. Young couples saving for their first home, retirees trying to understand their pensions, people just like George, Findlay, and I teach. I teach them about compounding interest, about the red flags of a scam, about the quiet power of a balanced budget.